a story I'm going to tell now, and it's 6 little words. It begins with 6 little words. And those 6 little words are, you will never amount to anything. Now, those words weren't said about me, at least not to my face, not to my knowledge, behind my back. They were said about a child, and I thought it was about 200 years ago. But it turns out it's only 125 years ago, so it's not long at all. Just 125 years ago. Now, the reason it's relevant is because they were said about something you have heard of, and you're going to be astonished. But you've probably guessed by now, and his name is Albert Einstein. Now, you wonder about why those words would be said to a child. But they were different times, they were blunt times. We have a more insidious way of screening people out these days, and that's death by 1,000 qualifications. People aren't told directly, they're just gradually eased out of the system. Now, at this point, you'd think the lunatics have taken over the asylum, but that teacher's view was vindicated when Einstein was asked to remove himself from that school, to leave, for fear that he would be dragging that school into disrepute. His results would be dragging them down. Now, you might think at this point, well, that's the dangers of marking your own homework. If you offer up an opinion and then you're in a position to validate that opinion, then that's not a good thing. But in this case, Einstein was equally culpable because he wasn't a good fit for the type of education that this school promoted, and things haven't changed a lot. That was when an authority figure stand up and lectured peer groups who learn through rote and repetition. It's a listen and learn model. Now, he wasn't good at listen and learn, he wasn't good at drilling. So, I mean, the other kids outpaced him, and he was asked to leave, so which he did, and he went on an educational walkabout. Now, after a few years of this, after a few years of being homeschooled, his parents, his family and friends, they still had money. They decided to give him a go at another school. They were getting concerned. Now, they couldn't take him back to the same school because that approach would fail again. It wasn't a good fit. So instead, they enrolled him in something called a Pestalozzi school. Now, Pestalozzi wasn't interested in shallow processing, which is rote and repetition. It's drill based. It's the sort of thing where people repeat back a times table or simply repeat anything. Maybe it's you're taught to sort of sub-vocalize quietly to yourself over and over again if you want to hold on to information. Instead, they opted for deep processing. Now, Einstein was a visual thinker, and they encouraged the visualization of content. Now, this approach seemed to be an incredibly good fit for Einstein, and he just began to fly. Now, despite giving everybody else a 10-year head start and undergoing a fundamental change in approach in how he learned, less than 10 years later, he won the Nobel Prize that won him. He won the Nobel Prize for physics. He wrote but along the way, it wasn't smooth sailing. He only got a place in the second best university in Switzerland. He was turned down from his first choice, and he only got a middling degree because teaching style wasn't a good fit with the way he was thinking. You can think of it as somebody being taught in a second or third or fourth language that they're not very familiar with. So you're not going to get the best results. Now, once Einstein left university, he didn't secure the qualifications that would get him the academic career that he wanted. So he got a job tutoring, and then he secured a job in a Swiss patents office. It was a patent clerk, third class, 25 years old. And he kept up an interest in physics. And it was here that he wrote the paper that won him the Nobel Prize for physics. Now, the moral of this story is you should never, ever, ever give up. It's never, ever too late. 10 years after making a fundamental change in approach, a school dropout wins Nobel Prize for physics, or at least writes the paper that wins him the Nobel Prize for physics. Now, for the people who say that Einstein is a one-off, that we can't learn anything from his story. Well, I beg to differ. I would say that if Einstein fails, if Einstein's screened out, then there is no hope for the people who share Einstein's traits, because he was so bright he should have sailed through. And there's plenty of prodigies who simply sailed through education and apparently put no effort whatsoever into their studies, and yet graduate with firsts from the Oxbridge colleges. So again, the moral is it's never ever too late to make a fundamental change of approach. Einstein did. Einstein pursued a Pestalozzi approach, and the Pestalozzi approach turned his life around. Now at this point, I'm just going to go on and define working memory. Now I'm going to start by giving a traditional academic definition and some way of comparing and contrasting. Now this is a good definition. Working memory is defined as the conscious ability to work with information, and by conscious I mean that ability to take information off a page, out of the ether if somebody's speaking like I am, and internalize it, to hang on to it, so that you can reformulate and manipulate it, so that you can reflect upon it, boil it down, turn it over, apply it. You need to be able to do all these things over extended time frames and mesh information from multiple fragmented sources for your working memory to be really effective. Working memory in general plays a tremendously important function in your ability to learn. If your working memory is substandard, then you have no foundations. Memory is the foundation of thought in many ways. Now that's a good definition, and I've tried to sell it as well as I can, but for me that's still slightly empty. Now, if I was to pursue a Pestalozzi approach, then I would conceptualize information in an entirely different way. Now, this doesn't come from books. This comes from the 6 square inches of real estate between the ears. It's not a difficult thing to do, and again, thinking about what you're learning as you're learning it is a tremendously powerful way of gaining a level of understanding, of boiling things down. So I would conceptualize working memory as one of those old video projectors. Now, you may choose to conceptualize it another way, but for me, one of the old video projectors with the film that you feed in on the reels. Now, once you turn that projector on, then it creates something called sensory input. Now, sensory input would be, in this case, it would be sound and pictures, or moving pictures. Now, you don't want to take in all of that information. You want to isolate certain frames, and the hope that encapsulates what it is you're trying to internalize, so that you can retrieve that at a later date. You place the information in somewhere called working memory. I like to think of that as an editing room. Now, one of the traits of working memory, well, there's 2 traits really. And the first trait is that working memory is purged anywhere between 30 and 60 seconds, depending on the individual. And the second trait is that we can only store, it's been, statistics research tells us somewhere between 5 and 9 pieces of information. And that's what this test is assessing for now. Now, obviously, the more information you can store, the better equipped you are to succeed inside education, inside training, the better the investment you are to potential employers. So we've got the 2 traits, and information is being purged after 30 seconds. So if you want to hang on to that, then you've got to engage in some kind of shallow processing. That would be drill based, and most people that's some kind of quiet sub-vocalized repetition. Now the problem with that is it creates noise, so it starts to create a chaotic environment inside working memory, because you want to be able to reformulate and manipulate that information. That's difficult to do if you're quietly sub-vocalizing. It's similar to if you're trying to add up a list of numbers and somebody is speaking over the top or reading another list of numbers. As a further complicating factor is that when you place information inside working memory, then you open up a gateway to long-term memory, and information starts flooding in from an internal source. And there's a fourth complicating factor that makes this whole process truly chaotic, and that's when information is inside working memory, it starts to relate to one another in a way that the author or speaker could not imagine. The first to the sixth to the sixth to the second piece of information, to forge connections which are quite truly random, forwards, backwards, it doesn't matter. You can think of it as, well, if you've ever seen one of those animated chemistry experiments when particles start to bounce around and bounce off one another. Now, in a way, that's very positive, because the more connections you make, the better the brain is at finding long-term storage for that information. Now, if you can only store 5 pieces of information, then your connections are limited to just 15 numbers. We can work that out using something called a triangular formula number. But if you can increase from 5 to 10, then the number of connections, the triangular number for that, is an astonishing 55. So that's why people with superior working memories do better inside education and training. That's why it's so important. That's why it's more important than IQ. That's why it's essentially a bottleneck. So if you can hold on to more information and you can hold on to it for longer, then you are set up to succeed. Now, we've laid out a picture of a chaotic environment that is working memory. Now, you must remember that working memory sits at the bottom of a thinking skill pyramids. And above that is understanding, and above that analysis, application. And above that is your ability to synthesize. Now, your ability to synthesize is when you can take old information, combine it with new information, and infer new insights, new facts, new ideas. It's sort of creative thought. And at the very top of that pyramid, it's evaluation. Now, evaluation is once you've resolved information, once you've fixed it, you decide what you want to hang on to and what you want to discard. Because sometimes after you've actually understood something, you decide that it's not worth understanding after all, and you discard it. But if you are simply learning parrot fashion, then you don't know what's relevant, you don't know what's relevant, so irrelevant, so you hang on to everything. And that's why it's important to be able to think about what you're learning as you're learning it, because otherwise you're simply going to end up with too much information, and you're not going to be able to sort through and pick out the gems. So if I was to summarize at this point, I would say that the ability to make more connections is crucial to your ability to, well, it depends on your ability to concentrate. So if you can concentrate a bit longer, you make more connections. You make more connections, and you're in a better position to form what academics call a cognitive college. Now, a cognitive college is, well, that's the framework of a subject. That's the outline of a subject. That's the edges of a puzzle, if you like. Now, once you've established the framework, the edges of the puzzle, then you are in a position to engage in useful critical thinking. And the useful critical thinking allows you to identify the gaps in your knowledge, the areas that you don't understand. You can read around the subject and you can fill in those gaps, and you can attain a level of subject mastery. Now, only once you've attained this level of subject mastery are you able to take a helicopter view, and you're able to come up with conceptual and creative leaps. And that's what they want inside academics, and especially that's what they want inside knowledge jobs. They want you to totally master the subject, and they want you to attain a helicopter view, so that you are able to be at your most productive. And all this comes from just a marginal improvement in concentration, improving that one number, that working memory quotient.